Okay, Assalamualaikum and good afternoon to everybody. Yeah, respected speaker of the day, Dr. Nurul Elia, Dr. Dr. Nur Hayati as coordinator of academic exercise, yeah, which is a research project for final year students for undergraduate. And we also have today Dr. Elia, a few master or PhD students here. We have invited and opened today's session to the postgraduate department. And good day to all final year students. Yeah, we have reached the second last sessions of a series of our AE workshops. Yeah, this is our fourth workshop, and today especially on the topic of qualitative research. Even if you are not doing qualitative research design, it is good to know, yeah, more about how to do research qualitatively. So today we have with us an expert from the faculty, yeah, one of the expert, Dr. Nurul Elia, or fondly known as Dr. Elia. Yeah, she is the head of TESOL department for undergraduate, and she has done her PhD research using qualitative approach. Right, Dr. Elia? Right, yeah. So you can ask a question, yeah. Let it be informal and don't be shy. You can type in the chat box, yeah, or ask throughout the entire session. I have recorded this session. Inshallah, we will share you the link and recording, and Dr. Elia will also share with you the slides later. Uh, okay, so I think that's all from me. Attendance will be given at the end of the session. Dr. Elia, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Muslia, for having me on this AE clinic series. Um, I think actually I just want to clarify, I'm not an expert, far from being an expert. A little bit of experience doing qualitative research, and just a sharing experience on what what I did, or what I've experienced in doing qualitative research. Yeah, so just sharing some. So for today, what I have in mind is just to share with you guys some basic steps on what you can do when you approach a research using qualitative data. All right. But before that, I see that we have about 54 participants. Some are very familiar names. Good to see you guys here. And for the rest who are not here, I mean, maybe your friends, just tell them Dr. Elia says hi with the question that AE is your AE done or almost done, since they're not here. So just tell them that lah. Yeah. Okay, so for today, we'll start off with some scene setting. All right. So I think Dr. Lee, I don't think I need to introduce myself. I've been with the TESOL department for quite some time, I think since 2008 until now. So that's a little bit of background about me. I've been teaching methodology courses in the TESOL department. And of course, today, although I'm from the TESOL department, I will try as much as I can to accommodate to any other questions from other fields as well, as much as I can to answer your questions. Yeah, I've tried to make this presentation to be as generic as possible, so that it can be applied regardless of your program, regardless of whether you are in the PJK department, math education or science education. Hopefully this is something that is generic enough for you to apply in your own research. Okay, all right, so let's start. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is an overview of what we are going to do today. All right, so we will start with some basic introduction, some scene setting. And then we will move on to having to look at the basic steps to a thematic analysis in qualitative research, which is the heart of today's talk, I believe. And then we're going to move on to talk about avoiding bias in qualitative analysis. So, of course, a lot of the risk that is involved with qualitative research is bias. How can you avoid being biased towards what you have found from your data? Because it's not like quantitative research where it's black and white kind of a thing. For qualitative research, there's a lot of gray area, and how do you navigate through this gray area and to avoid bias in your qualitative analysis, which is very, very important to ensure that your findings are valid and reliable. All right, and then we're going to close with some Q&A session. So hopefully I can also help to address some of your questions, some of your queries, and we will call it a day. I don't think I will be taking up until 2 hours. I think maybe an hour and a half, something like that. So we'll go with the flow. Yeah. All right. Okay, now let's start by reviewing some of the approaches of qualitative data collection. All right, so I'll try to make this as interactive as possible using the chat box. Maybe you can type out very quickly what kind of qualitative data collection can you name? Can you name a few in the chat box? So let's see what you can tell me. Okay, Zakwan says interview, article review, okay? Some more. Is that only Zakwan in the session? No, right? Okay. Nurul said observation. Okay. What else? Idora said observation as well. What else? Focus groups interview. I assume it's focus group interview. All right. FGD. What is FGD? Focus group. Is it focus group discussion? I think. Document analysis. Thank you, Anwar. Case studies. Yes, you guys are right. Okay. So some of the qualitative data collection may involve, but not restricted to, observation, all right, interviews, documents, as well as audio-visual materials. So when we talk about observation, I think before we move on to the methods of qualitative data collection, the first thing that you need to decide is whether or not your research topic and your research question can be explored using a qualitative data analysis. All right, so you need to decide on that first. So it is not one size fits all kind of a thing. So you need to first decide what is the research design that you will have for your research, depending on how you phrase your research objectives, research questions, research problems, and what is your intention actually. So not all research is suitable for qualitative research design, and not all research is suitable for quantitative research design. So you have to be clear on how you decide on whether or not it's a qualitative data approach, or whether it's a quantitative data approach, or whether it's a mixed method. Those are some of the decisions that you have to make prior to deciding on what kind of data do you collect for your research. All right. So for qualitative data, some of the data that you can actually collect from the field includes, of course, number one is classroom observation. So we are talking about, we are talking in context of being a teacher educator. So normally the kind of AE writing that you will be doing would involve classroom observation. So let's say you want to observe some teachers teaching. All right. So when you are doing that observation, what is it that you collect from the field? So of course you don't just observe and daydream and then just look around. That's not what we do in observation. So of course when you do observation, there must be some form of field note that you collect while you are observing the class, right? You might want to note down the teacher-student interaction. You might want to note down the classroom activities. You might want to note down on the teaching approaches. So what is it that you look out for? What is it that you write down in your field notes will be determined by your research question and your research objectives. So that's why I said you have to be very clear in terms of what you want from your research. All right. So secondly, all right, you may also have interviews. So interviews, there are many different types of interviews. So you have the semi-structured interview, you have structured interview, you also have focus group interviews. So there are many different types of interviews that you can explore. So all those are the different variations that you can have in for interviews. So the data that you will get from these interview sessions would include your interview notes as well as your interview transcription. All right. So of course, after you have interviewed, it's good to have a recorder, and it's good for you to have a good recorder, I would say, to record your interview session. Why? Because these interviews will have to be transcribed. So I hope by now you should know what does it mean by interview transcription. You will have to sort of like listen and type out what these people have said. Now, why do you need to type out? Why can't you just listen and just pick out things from the recording? Any idea? Boleh panggil nama kot ni eh? Any idea why you have to transcribe the interviews? And why can't you just listen and then, just type out what you feel like you want to type out? Can we get Nur Ain? So we can relate the data. That's one answer from the chat box.
Maybe
Why
as
do
a
we,
proof
as a proof of what, Liana?
of the like the from the data, like as a proof
Yes,
for the
as
data, yeah.
evidence. So yes, so like what Lukman has said, Lukman in the said, because we cannot include videos and recordings in the paper, in the writing. So of course you will have to transcribe. And another thing is, when you transcribe these interviews, you will get a clearer picture in terms of what is being mentioned in the interviews, because you see it on paper. So when you listen, sometimes the message gets shortened, gets truncated. So when you write it down, it's something that is more concrete than just a recording, and that makes analysis a lot easier. Okay, just speaking in layman's term, the logic behind it is that. So of course you have to transcribe so that it's easier for you to identify what are some of the key things that are being mentioned by the participants. All right. Okay. Now the third one is document analysis. All right. So it doesn't mean that you only have classroom observation or interviews. You can also have document analysis as part of your qualitative data. All right. Now, these documents may include journals or public documents like school circulars, meetings, memos for meetings, memos to call on for a meeting, minutes of meetings, So all this, what you want to collect again is dependent upon what you want to identify. What is it that you are looking for? So let's say you want to examine, student teachers' ability to reflect on their lessons. Okay. So if let's say you want to look at their reflection, what are some of the documents that you can collect from the practicum teachers? What do you think? Let's say I want to look at reflective practice. So what are some of the documents that I can look at as my data, as my qualitative data? Lesson plan. Okay, yes, Lukman got it right. It's actually the reflective journal that you are supposed to write in. Do you remember that you have your reflective journal when you do your practicum? So that can be an example of a document that you might want to examine if, let's say, reflection is something that you are looking at for your AE research. All right. So it all depends on what you want to look out for. So documents is definitely one of them. Okay, another one is audiovisual material. So let's say you want to include some video and audio recordings or photographs, you can do that as well. But of course, again, this depends on what is it that you are examining for your research. So let's say if you are from the arts department and then you want to examine some theme that emerges from one particular painter or from one particular artist. So you might want to examine different paintings and what are some of the things that you can identify from those paintings. So that is also part of qualitative data. All right. Okay, so far so good, guys. Are we good so far? So these are some of the qualitative data, the types of qualitative data that you might have in your research. All right, so observation, interviews, documents, and audiovisual materials. So of course, the data comes from the field notes, the interview notes and interview transcription, journals, public documents, and video, audio, as well as photographs, right? Okay, next. Okay, so when you do a thematic analysis, it's very important for you to go through, I think in essence, I would say if you want to do qualitative data, a qualitative research, one very important trait that you must have with you is, the most important skill that you must have is organizational skill. So if you're the type that is, if you are someone who is not organized, you are very cluttered. So that's something that you need to work on before you embark on qualitative research. All right. Why do I say you must be organized in a qualitative research? Because the amount of data that you will get from your data collection will be massive. All right. Massive means it's a lot of text and words and different types. So if you're not organized, if you don't know which one is which, you will feel very overwhelmed with the amount of data that you have. So the first thing that you need to work on is your organizational skill. So you need to know how to compartmentalize things. And at the same time, you need to be able to cross-check between the data that you have collected. All right. So that is the skill that you must have. Okay. So the first step that you take upon when you do thematic analysis is preparing and organizing the data. Okay, so of course, so let's say you have interviewed, okay, let's say you have interviewed 5 teachers. Okay, 5 teachers, and then you have observed their lessons for 3 times. So 3 lesson observation for each one. So you have 15 lesson observation. Am I right? Okay, so you need to organize this data according to relevant folders based on the needs of your study. So it depends. So from these 5 teachers, you might want to have one folder for each teacher, all right? Or you might want to organize your data in the form of the data collected. So maybe interview and lesson observation. So it depends on, but the most important thing is you need to find a way to organize those data. They cannot just be cluttered like that. So the first thing that you need to do is to sort and arrange the data according to relevant folders based on the needs of your study. All right. So there must be a systematic management to organize the data. So some of the things that you would include in preparing and organizing the data are transcribing your interviews, scanning your documents, or typing out the field notes. So let's say you have interviewed these 5 teachers. The first step is to transcribe these interviews. You need to have it on paper. So transcribe the interviews is the first, transcribing the interviews is the first step. Okay, now let's say you have collected your friends' reflective journals and it's handwritten, all right? It's logical to scan the documents if, let's say, the analysis that you would like to do, let's say you are using, the analysis of this data can be done manually. Manually means you yourself with the data on paper. But now we have so many softwares to help you to organize and analyze the data, but the analysis needs to come from you. But there is some form of software that you can actually use to help you to analyze those data. So let's say if you're using a software, normally if let's say the documents are in hard copy form, there will be a need for you to scan the documents and to upload it in the form of PDF so that you can use it with the software. But if you're doing it manually, so that's fine. So you might not need to scan the documents. All right. And you also need to type out the field notes. Let's say from the classroom observation, you have taken out a lot of field notes. Sometimes you can't even read your own handwriting. Then very quickly you need to type it out so that it's not lost in time. So after sometimes you tend to forget what happened in the classroom. So you must, when you type it out, all right, so things will become clearer to you as you go along, right? So the first step is always to prepare and organize your data. You must do this or else you will feel very overwhelmed. So step by step. So step one is to prepare and organize the data, right? So if you can imagine, like if you have your desktop, you just imagine that you have different folder for different things, right? So it's the same concept. So for your AE, for your qualitative data, you must have those small folders. And how do you decide what you need to have in these small folders? It depends on how you view your data. So it depends, like maybe student A, how she organizes her data might be different from student B. It all depends on your research objectives, research questions, and your organizational skills. All right, so that's the first step. Now, the second step is you need to engage yourself with the data. All right, what does it mean by engage yourself with the data? So when we talk about qualitative data analysis, you're not dealing with numbers. You're dealing with text and things that are a bit more abstract than just numbers. All right, so you have to make sure you familiarize yourself with the data. Okay, so the first thing that you do is you need to read. Remember the transcription that you have transcribed earlier, the interview transcription? So the first thing that you need to do is you need to become familiar with the data. You need to read, reread. You might need to listen to the audio recording again. Immerse yourself, submerge yourself in the data so that you understand what is actually going on. All right, in the data. So you might have to read, reread, and just understand what goes on in the data. All right. The second thing that you might want to do once you have reread many times, you kind of have a general idea on what is in the data that you have collected. You might want to note down initial observation. So maybe some teachers, when you interview them, you noted down that something that you might not find from the transcript is when you listen, she sounded frustrated. So you might want to write down frustration, expressing frustration. Maybe there's some sound of excitement. So maybe you want to note that down in your initial observation. So write all those things down because you don't know when it comes in handy. All right. And then you will have a general sense of the information when you reflect on the overall meaning of the data. So that means after you have done all this, you will then get a general sense of the information that you have gathered from all these different types of data that you have collected. Right? So the first one just now, prepare and organize data. Number two, you need to engage yourself with the data. Read, reread, note down initial observation. What do you think? What are some of the things that you feel important to be noted down? All those comes with the second step. All right? Okay. Now, next, the most important step. This is the most important step in a qualitative data analysis. The third one is coding the extracts from the data. So remember, you have like maybe a whole, let's say it's an interview transcription. All right. So once you have gotten like maybe 3 or 4 pages of interview transcript from one participant, you have read, you have noted down, and so on. Now you begin coding. Right. So there are two types of coding: inductive versus deductive. Deductive is top down. Top down means you already have set yourself with some form of things that you want to look out for. So it can be deductive. So let's say you want to look out for types of activities. You want to look at teacher talk, student talk. So deductive means you have a preset things that you want to look out for in the data. So how do you decide on this, on this preset things? It goes back to your literature. So if, let's say, from your reading, you know that for your research topic, there are 5 things that you can look out for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can use these 5 things. And when you go through your data, you cari lah all these 5 things. So katakanlah types of activities. The teacher mentioned group work. Then you highlight group work. Then you terus assign types of activities. Okay, so that is deductive. Now, another type is inductive. Inductive means you code the data as you go along. All right, so that means as you read, you identify what are the things that you find interesting in the data for you to code. Okay, the word here is code. Now, after some time, you might have a long list of codes. I'll show you later what I mean by code after this. Now, in coding, it's very important for you to also have something called a code book. All right. It depends on how you approach this. Some people uses Microsoft Excel, all right, to have a code book. But of course, with the usage of softwares, all this becomes a lot easier to manage. All right. So when you are coding, like what I mentioned earlier, there are two types of these very famous softwares that we normally use for qualitative data analysis, which is NVivo and Atlas.ti. So if let's say this is something that you want to explore, there's a lot of YouTube videos on how you can actually use these softwares to help you manage your qualitative data. All right, because it's easy, because it's not it's easy because if let's say you have coded types of activities, you don't have to recall from your memory or you have to flip through your code book. You type you just type activity, it will give you a whole list from what you have typed earlier. So in that sense, coding is made easier because the system remembers what you have written instead of you having to flip through a manual code book sort of a thing. All right. Okay, so we have covered for coding three things. Number one, types of coding, inductive versus deductive. Remember, deductive is a preset code that you want to look out for in your data. Inductive means you code as you go along. You don't allow yourself to be dictated by a predetermined code, but you code as you read through the data. All right. Number two, we have talked about the code book. And number three, I have introduced to you the notion of using a software in coding your qualitative data, which might be very, very useful if you have lots and lots of qualitative data to be analyzed. All right. Okay, now let's move on to the example. All right. How do you code the extracts? So number one, this is a sub-step to step number three, right? So the first step is you pick a document, all right? Let's say interview, your interview transcript, participant one. Remember just now we had 5 participants. You pick up the transcription from participant one, and then you go through the transcript, you read, ask yourself what is this about, assign the code in the margin. All right. Now, each code must be accompanied by a clear description. So that means, what does it mean? If let's say types of activities, you need to be able to answer what does it mean by types of activities? What is the description? So if your description is not clear, then your coding will be not organized. All right. So how do you determine it's that particular phrase that is mentioned in the data belongs to type of activities, right? Once you have done that, you will have a code list. You would have generated a whole bunch of a code list, and this is where having a code book will help to keep the list organized. I'll show you an example after this. Once you've done that, all right, you read a new extract and compare with the existing code list. So let's say from that one interview session, okay, let's say from participant one, you're done. So from participant one, already have, let's say, 10 codes. Okay, you pick up participants 2 interview questions. Oh, sorry, interview question block, interview transcription. You go through number 1, number 2, and number 3 again. And then you see whether the code that you have used for participant 1, does it match with any of participants 2 interview transcription. Try as much as you can to match to what you have developed for participant 1. All right. If let's say there's no match, confirm. You have looked at the description again and again. It's something that is new, something that was not mentioned by participant 1. Then you create a new code. So that means 11 dah lah, because over here there's 10. There's one new one from here. So you add that to 11 codes. So far so good, guys. I hope you're not confused, yeah? Give me a thumbs up if you're okay. So far okay, yeah? All right, okay. Now, move on. Once you're done with participant 2, you move on to participant 3. You repeat the same step. So let's say from participant 3, from all the 11 codes, you found that participant 3 actually mentioned something entirely new. There are 4 new things that are mentioned. And it doesn't match with the 11 codes that you have come up with earlier. So you add on 4 more codes to your code list. Now you have 15 codes altogether. And that step is repeated for participant number 4, is repeated for participant number 5. So there is a possibility that after you have gone through all 5 interview transcripts, you might end up with maybe 20 codes or more, depending on how you do the matching and rematching. So again, in order for you to make sure you can match as carefully as possible, because you want your code list to be lean. You don't want it to be messy. You want it to be as lean as possible. So you must make sure that the descriptions are clear. All right, we'll have a look at the example later. So as the new codes emerge, the code list that you have in number 3 just now must be revised. So what is it that you have added on to the code? And then from the code, when you have a whole list, 20 lists, when you look at it again, you will notice, actually number 11 and number 12 overlaps. So that's where you can collapse and you can make it just into one, and then you have to go back to your data and correct it. All right. And finally, you need to go for a final review. Make sure the meaning has been represented. So that means what you have mentioned in the, what you have identified in the code list is already being represented by the right description. Okay, so that is coding. Now, next one. Okay, now let's see. Let's try and do this together. Code the extracts from the data below. All right, so let's say the research objective is to explore the food intake of preschoolers in an urban preschool. Okay, so this is what I have for participant 1. This is what I have for participant 2. Okay. Okay. So participant 1 said, I love toast. I will always have toast in the morning before I come to school. Sometimes if I'm late, I will eat them in the car. So this is from participant 1. EH is the initial, and then I label as interview 1. This is also important, yeah? Labeling. So this is something that you need to have in order for you to write your report later. And participant 2 says, I always wake up late because I sleep late. I don't eat at home. I will eat at school during my break time. Okay, now let's have a look at the first one. When you read this, what is it that you want to, looking at the research objective, what are the things that you want to highlight? Tell me the words that you want to highlight. Food, okay? Ada food ke in the first one? Tak ada. The first statement. The first statement ni, tell me, you don't look at the objective. I want you to tell me the words that you can highlight from the first statement. Okay? Somebody says, in the morning. Okay? Lagi? Okay, let me see the chat box. Okay, Zakwan said toast, morning, late. Okay, some more? Eat in the morning, eat during break time. Okay? Some more? Car. Okay, what else? Okay, so that's the first one, eh? Second one. Okay, second statement. I always wake up late because I sleep late. I don't eat at home. I will eat at school during my break time. Again, look at the research objective, guys. When you are coding, you have to remember what is your research objective. Okay, Amrina said school. Lagi? Keep them coming. Late, sleep, break time. Okay. Zakwan, when you are coding, try to have more than just one word. Maybe get a few phrases so that you know what is it that you are looking for. All right. Okay, now let's see what I have highlighted. Okay, remember, the objective is to explore the food intake of preschoolers in an urban preschool. Okay, let's see what I have highlighted. Okay, so I have highlighted toast, okay, and I have highlighted before I come to school. Okay, so the first thing that I want to highlight is food name. Toast ni apa? What is it? What is the code for toast? It's a food type or food name. Okay, before I come to school, I code it as time at home. Because in the second one, I have I don't eat at home. Time not at home. Right? I always wake up late. So what is waking up late? So I label that as sleeping habit. Okay. And during my break time is also time, break time. So these are some of the codes that I have assigned to the words and to the data that I've collected from the interview. So remember, the objective is to explore the food intake of preschoolers in an urban preschool. So types of food, time at home, sleeping habits. So all these are the things that I noted down. So what I just did with you guys just now is an example of inductive coding. So you code as you go along. Deductive coding is the other way around. Deductive means, let's say from your reading, you already know the things that you want to look out for is food names, sleeping time, and you find all those things in the data. Is the other way around. The codes have been preset. So far, so good. Give me a thumbs up if you're good. If there's no thumbs up, I think you're a bit confused. So Alif has raised a hand. Yes, Alif? Is that a question? No, yeah, I assume that's no question. All right. Now, next. I accidentally raised my hand. Okay. So the next step, okay, same thing. Now I'm using just now I was just using a simple example that you can relate to. The next one, the next example is something that is a little bit more serious. All right, something that is a little bit more related to your studies, perhaps. Okay, let's say the research objective is to explore pedagogical practices intended for students' effective learning. Pedagogical practices, yeah, remember that those terms, pedagogical practices intended for students' effective learning. Okay, so the finding is that a participant expressed how pleased she was that a group of students in her class exhibited the confidence to ask questions during a mathematics lesson. I was a bit surprised. My three boys that are low academic achievers in maths, they actually asked the most questions. So I was really impressed with them. They are not afraid and they just want to learn how to do it. So okay, look at the italicized statement. Beginning from I was a bit surprised. Now tell me what is the phrase or what are the phrases that you would highlight looking at the research objective? Anyone? In the chat box. Type out your answer. So let's say you want to explore pedagogical practices. So what is the phrase that you would ask the most questions? What about the rest? Ask the most questions. Okay, ask the most questions. Okay, remember pedagogical practices, yeah? Not afraid. Thank you, Dr. Lia. Okay, all right. Now let's have a look. So for this particular example, now remember it's to explore pedagogical practices, yeah? Okay. They are not afraid and they just want to learn how to do it. Because remember, we want to explore pedagogical practices. So one of the thing that you are supposed to look out for is they are not afraid and they just want to learn how to do it. Safe learning. So that is the code that is assigned to this particular phrase. Okay. Now, safe learning is the code. The one in the light green in the other box is the description. When teachers value students feeling non-threatened and comfortable in the classroom environment. So whenever you read your other data later, if let's say you identify whenever the teacher said they are not, students are not threatened, students are confident, you will label that as safe learning. So you see, the description is very, very important because it will help you to code the next ones better. Got it? Right. Okay, let's try another one. It's the same research objective to explore pedagogical practices. So another participant commented, you have to make connections constantly because maths is relevant in real life, in life and in the real world. So which phrase would you highlight looking at the looking at the research objective? Make connections constantly. Okay. Real world. Betul. Relevant in real life and the real world. Okay. All right. Now let's see what the answer is. Right. For this particular statement, the highlighted sentence is make connections constantly because maths is relevant in life. So that is the phrase that is highlighted. When I say highlighted, means you actually highlight, yeah? And then you code it. What is the code that you want to assign to it? Does it match with the earlier one? Earlier one, safe learning. So remember, earlier one was safe learning. So remember the description is when the students feel not threatened, right? So is this safe learning? Obviously, it's not safe learning. So when you look at the description, it doesn't match. So when you see it doesn't match, so you need to come up with a new coding. So the new coding is linked learning. So you label linked learning. So the coding is, it doesn't have, it could be from your literature. It could also be something that you can assign the codes. It doesn't have to be something that is a proper term for it. No, it can be linked learning is maybe something that the author comes up with. Okay, so the description, now the next thing that I want to talk to you about is the description that you give to the codes. Now let's say the codes description begins with how teachers make learning connections for students between the concept of time zone from mathematical and geographical perspectives. Okay, the first one, when you code it earlier, this is how you describe. But after a few coding, after a few types of data, after a few interview transcription, you feel like, I think I need to modify the description so that it's a bit more generic, so that I can tap on to much more data in my documents. So you can change it to teachers explaining why a learning task is chosen and how it connects with students' other learning and life. So I'm showing you now how the description may change over time as you go along coding the other types of data that you have, right? So the description must be accurate. So far, so good? Dr. Muzlia je okay? Orang lain? You guys okay? Are you still with me or are you already in La La Land? All right, okay. Okay, now that you have, now you know that you can, this is how you code. All right, this is how you code the data that you have. Remember, memang messy, but let's go through it step by step, yeah? Okay, the next one, generate the code categories from the codes. So let's say you have, after you have done the coding, the first step, you end up with, let's say for the 5 teachers just now, you have 20 codes. Okay, you have gone through matching, rematching, but match, you come up with a new code. So you have 20 codes altogether. Now, from that 20 codes, what you want to do now is to put them in categories that you can, so that it's much more manageable. All right, so after many rounds of coding, you will now have a long list of, perhaps it can be up to 50. If you have a big, number of data, you might end up with 50 codes. I think I had more than that. But if it's just 5 uh, teachers and you end up with 20, it's fine. All right. Now this 20, that's why I said it has to be lean. It has to be clean and lean. That means it's economical in number. All right. So the next step is to categorize these codes into categories. Now, a code category represents a collection of similar data sorted into the same place and describe the characteristics of the category. Now, let's have a look at the example. Now, this is the example. So you remember the example that I gave you earlier to explore the intake of preschoolers in an urban preschool. So this is the code that we talked about earlier. Do you remember? Food name, time at home, time not at home, sleeping habit. So all these 4 that we identified those codes from the example. So let's say from the other types of data comes all these things. Breakfast, snack, lunch, dinner, food. So these are the codes assigned to the data that you have read earlier. Now with the codes come the code description. What does it mean by food name? What does it mean by time at home? Time not at home. So you must make sure the code description is clear in order for you to match, rematch, or come up with a new code as you go along. All right. After that, you have the code text as well. You can't be doing like for every phrase you want to write down food, name, time, not at home. It's not economical. So in order for you to code faster, you can actually assign it to code text. So instead of writing down food name, you can just write FN. Time at home, TAH. Time not at home, TNAH. So you can do that as you go along. So it's faster. So you don't have to spell every single thing one by one. But of course, if you do it using a software, when you type FN, it will come up and you can just pick and choose from all the choices that there is. So you don't have to rely on memory. Okay, now let's say from all these food codes, okay, from the pink column, you want to look at the purple column now, the code categories. So all these codes can actually be categorized into smaller categories. So now we have food name is meals, under meals, snack is considered as meals as well. Lunch is meals, dinner is meals, and that's all. And then you also have types of food, fast food, home cooked, and there's taste as well. There's venue as well. All right, so it all depends on how you can make sense of the codes that you have collected. How can you categorize them in the different categories? So that's step number 4. So you have all the codes. Now you are collapsing them into the different categories so that it's much more easier for you to contextualize it in terms of your research. Remember, the purpose is to answer that question. Explore the food intake of preschoolers in an urban preschool. So remember, don't lose track of what your research objective is. Okay. Now, for the other research that we did, for the other type of coding that we did just now, in terms of the research objective, to explore pedagogical practices intended for students' effective learning, the one that we did earlier. So remember, we have these codes, linked learning, and then there's safe learning. So remember, that was the code. And remember, the descriptions that was given to the codes was this. Teachers explaining why, teachers valuing, students feeling non-threatened, and so on. Hold on, yeah, I need to mute some people. Okay, all right. So now from all these different codes, okay, so that is the description. This is the code text. So learning goals is tagged as LG. Learning post school is tagged as LPS. So all these different codes you have. Then what you need to do now is to collapse it into code categories. Now, when we talk about assigned roles, behavior influences, now this particular author has decided to come up with managed learning, the ways the teachers manage learning. So in managing learning, so all this comes under managing learning, isn't it? Procedures, seating and working arrangement, class grouping, collaborative responsibility, all this comes under how the teachers manage learning. So that is the code category that is assigned to the different codes. All right. Another thing is design meaningful learning. So under design meaningful learning, you need to decide. So learning goal, learning post-school learning, purposeful learning comes under what category? You decide what is the code category that you would like to name. Okay, so it doesn't have to be something that is, dictated in the literature. It doesn't have to be a proper term or jargon. It can be something that you can understand. Most importantly, you need to understand the code categories because you are going to write about the code categories later. Okay, so clear on generating the code categories from the codes. So it's just a matter of making it into, assigning the different categories that you have in the codes for the different categories that you might have. Okay? Okay, next. Okay, number 5. Now, this is also important. Now, once you are done with the code categories, you need to know now how to, Sari, I will answer your question after this, yeah? Conceptualize the themes from the categorized coded extracts. So in conceptualizing the themes, it's important for you to go back to the literature that forms the conceptual framework of your research. So of course, if let's say you want to look at let's say you want to look at explore pedagogical practices, you must have done your literature review, isn't it? You must already have some idea on how your conceptual framework looks like. So in conceptualizing those themes, you need to go back to your conceptual framework and you interpret the data to form a larger meaning by linking the data to the literature. And then you define each theme in relation to existing literature. Okay, so how do you do that? So let's see. Okay, now let's say in the study of the preschoolers, the emerging themes for the research from the categories, the code categories just now, you can decide that you want to look at basic principles of food intake, parental involvement in forming their food intake, school and the school factors informing the children's understanding about food intake. So from the categories, from the codes, from the code categories, from your reading, that's how you come up with the emerging themes. Okay, it cannot just be you, it has to be related to the literature that you have read. Now, in the study done by Peel, looking at pedagogical practices just now, remember, the safe learning and linked learning, 4 themes were identified as the foundation for self-regulated learning, where it represented the teacher's approaches to 4 things: connect, facilitate, diversify, and socialize the learning for the students. So the quotes just now help the author to answer her research question in this manner. Okay? So once you are done with the themes, you go to the last one where you will have to contextualize and represent the findings. So what you need to do in the 6, I would say the most challenging one is not the number 1 until number 5, is actually it's progressively becoming a little bit more challenging as you go along. The first one is the easy. The sixth one is the most difficult, I would say. Not difficult. Difficult is a very negative word. The most challenging is number 6. You need to be able to write well in order for you to represent your findings. Because when you talk about qualitative research, you need to be able to explain, you need to be able to justify, you need to be able to bring together the different types of data in order for you to answer the research question. All right. So number 1, bring together the analytic narrative and vivid data extracts to inform the findings. Vivid means you have to actually take out the samples from your data. You have to put it up in your writing. You have to show the findings actually supports how, if let's say the theme just now, okay, let's say the theme is basic principles of food intake. You need to extract the data from your interviews with the children. Okay, participant 1 said this, participant 2 said this, participant 3 said this, and all this is related into the basic principles of food intake. So that is the meaning of vivid data extracts. You have to bring, you must be able to show your readers that you are, you have a good understanding of how your data works. And then you also have to interpret to make meaning, of course, with any kind of writing. You have to bring with you the interpretation of the data, all right? And the writing must be supported by extracts, like I mentioned earlier, organizational tables and data maps to apply the findings. So you can also put up some of the codes and the code categories and whatnot in your writing to support your findings. And of course, good writing skill is essential in reporting your findings accurately. So of course, in any kind of academic writing, I'm not talking just about TESOL students here, any form of academic writing for all the programs, you must have some form, you must have some basic in writing skill, which I'm sure you all have. All right. Okay. So that is number 6. So that's all. 6 steps. Easy or difficult? Is it easy or difficult? Easy. Challenging. Zahira ni risau dia tulis challenging because she's my student ni. Okay, all right. So of course, if you're doing it for the first time, of course, it will feel a bit overwhelming. But I'm not too worried about AE because for me, AE, the amount of data is still very much manageable. So let's say if you're interviewing 5 people and you're just doing lesson observation, I think that's quite manageable. It's not that overwhelming. It will be overwhelming if you have too much data. And normally your supervisor will be able to tell you, look, this is too much. If let's say you have 30 interviews, that's too much for an AE level, I would say. So your supervisor would be able to guide you through whether or not you have a lot or you have too little. All right. So for qualitative, normally the number of participants will be small, but the amount of data that you have is a lot. Because if let's say it's an interview, half an hour interview will easily get you what, 10 pages, I think? 10 pages of transcript that you have to go through. It has its own pros and cons, I would say. So again, go back to your research objective. Okay, now hold on. After doing all this without having any numbers to rely on, how are you going to be sure that you're not biased towards your analysis? How do you know that you're not, in other words, you're not, in Malay we say syok sendiri. Syok sendiri means you just do whatever you feel like you want to do. You must make sure that your data is still reliable. Although it's a qualitative research that you just go through, you just do interview and whatnot, that is still a need for that your data is reliable, that your data is valid. Okay, now how do you do that? So proposal developers, this is from Cresswell. If by now you should know Cresswell already. If you have never heard of Cresswell, I'm very worried. So you should know Cresswell by now. Proposal developers need to convey the steps that they will take in their studies to check for the accuracy and credibility of their findings. With academic writing, it's very, very important for you to establish credibility and accuracy. So if let's say, and objectivity, I would say, if you're not objective in your writing, objective means you're not biased, you are neutral, you are putting on the researcher's hat. That means you cannot say this is good or that's not good. You are just telling us what the data tells you. You cannot impose your opinion without being supported by the data. All right. So avoiding bias, we have come to the third part of the talk, which is to avoid bias in qualitative analysis. What are some of the things that you can do to ensure that you are not, just doing it in a whim and, to just make sure you are doing things correctly. So in ensuring trustworthiness, there are 4, 5, 6, 7, I think 7 things that you can actually do. Number 1 is triangulation. So triangulation is very, very important. What is triangulation? It's converging several sources of data or perspectives from participants. So triangulation, just imagine the triangle. So when it's a triangle, that means you have different sources of data, isn't it? So that means you have, how many points do we have? 3. So when you talk about triangulation, that means you need to have more than one source to confirm your findings. So let's say if you have a qualitative research, a qualitative research that is only doing an interview sahaja, and you don't have any other data collection method, that is just one interview. That's all. And you have 5 participants. Interview saja, and you interview sekali je. That is very dangerous because you don't have any other form to confirm what you have found from the interview. So I would recommend you to have more than one way of collecting your data. So that the more resources, the more sources you have, you can actually check, okay, I found this in my interview. Oh, the observation confirmed what I found in the interview. So from the interview, I found that the teachers were frustrated. And then when I observed the classroom observation, I noticed that the teachers actually were venting out to the students, something like that. That was not a good example, but something like that. Yeah. All right. Number 2, member checking. Taking back the specific descriptions or themes to the participants, you can actually, once you have found
Please.
Rafia,
Itulah dia.
Rafia,
Yes.
do you have a question? Okay, all right. So member checking, taking back the data to the specific description to the participant. So that means you ask them, okay, this is what I found, this is what I've concluded from the interview, from the data that I've collected from you. Is this something that you agree with, or is this something that you don't agree with? If let's say they say, I agree. So that means you have done your part lah. So that means it's something that you are doing it right. Next one is using thick, rich description. Now the findings description must transport readers to the setting and give element of shared experience. When you talk about qualitative research, you have to make sure that in describing the data, it cannot just be one phrase. Tak boleh. You have to make sure the context is not lost when you are bringing in the findings from the data to your writing. Tak boleh lah tulis just safe learning or just that one phrase that you want to choose from. Cannot. When you just pick and choose like short phrases, you are not being fair to the reader because we can't see the context of the whole thing. So maybe the whole sentence or one sentence before and one sentence after that, that would give a good, thick and rich description to your writing. All right. Now, next is demonstrate criticality. You must make sure that you demonstrate reflectivity and how the interpretation is shaped. So all this comes in your writing. So when you write, you cannot just say, you must be able to show, how do I give example on reflecting critically? You must make sure that in your writing, you're not just saying it because you feel like you want to say it, So you must be, it must be supported with the findings of your data from the data itself. So you must show that you are able to do that as well. Okay, next. Next is inter-rater reliability check. This is something that I have done before, not for my PhD, but for my other research. The set of data interpretation. Let's say you have the code the code list, the set of data interpretation. What you do is you have, let's say you have 30, maybe 20 statements you have 20 codes. Now the codings, you select some of the findings, you give that particular set of data, you give it to another reader, and then the reader would say whether they agree or disagree with your coding and with your code categories and whatnot. Now the degree of agreement is checked, for example, using the Cohen-Kappa's coefficient. So there is something called Cohen-Kappa. You can actually Google for it. The member checking, the level of agreement that is achieved between the researcher and the external examiner, you can actually carry out this statistical analysis. All right, to check the degree of agreement. So if it's above certain point, then you can say, I've given this to an external reader, and we have achieved this level of agreement, which is quite high. So that means that is ensuring that you are not just, doing it at a whim. So it's given to another party to be read. Another one is external auditor. Of course, you can use an external auditor to review the project. So an auditor could provide an objective assessment of the project if you're doing it fully qualitative. And another thing that is very, very important is your audit trail. Audit trail means you must ensure that the documents that you have collected are labeled and kept in an organized manner as a chain of evidence. So let's say you go for your examination for PhD students, sometimes for your Viva, you can actually go back to your, if let's say they want to have a look at some of the samples, some of the data samples that you have actually analyzed, you have an audit trail there. Okay, and that is how you ensure trustworthiness in collecting, in doing a qualitative research. Okay. All right, so let's recap. So we have come to the end of my talk today. So 6 basic steps. As I said, the first one is much more easier than the last. The first step that you do is you prepare and you organize your data. And number 2, you engage with your data, read, reread, write your initial observation. Number 3, you code as you go along, have your research objective in mind. As you go along, you highlight and then you quote the important themes, the important phrases that you have found from your data. Now, after you have had all these different 20 quotes, let's say, for these 5 participants, you need to collapse it into quote categories. And then from these quote categories, go back to your literature. From the literature, you come up with the themes. What are the themes that you would like to talk about? And then you contextualize and represent your findings in your writing. Okay, and these are some of the references that I use for today's talk. And that's it. Okay, now I will take on some questions from the chat box. I try to answer as much as I can. Yeah. Okay, hold on. I think just now I saw a question from Sari. Salam Doctor, I have a question. Can the code category comes from the conceptual framework we created? I would say yes. I think the conceptual framework will give you some ideas on what to look out for. So the answer is yes. Okay, Sari?
Thank you, Doctor. Just again, relating with the question,
Yes.
does that come under deductive approach, right? Because we have already come.
In a way, some people, I think it's difficult to say one way is correct than the other. I would say some people might have a combination of both pun ada juga. Some is guided by what you have read, but as you go along, you might find other things that are not included in the literature. So you might want to come up with a new code. Boleh juga. So it's not an either or thing. So I would say as you go along, you will see what fits with your study.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Dr. Muzlia has another question. Dr. Muzlia tanya soalan ni. Can we do coding and conceptualize themes if there is only one respondent using open-ended questionnaire? The answer is yes. You can code and you can conceptualize. But going back to the trustworthiness too, there might be a big question mark because there's only one participant and one questionnaire. So I would say the answer is yes, but there's a big question mark on the trustworthiness of the data. Okay, is that another? Oh, reference page. Dora wants to see the question, the reference page. Okay, so if you look at the reference, the one that actually, the examples that I took is actually from the last one. That one is a good article for you to read if you are doing thematic analysis. It goes through all those 6 steps that I talked about earlier. All right. Okay, any other questions?
Doctor, it's Siri again. Can I ask
Yes.
the external auditor?
Sorry?
I want to ask questions on the about external auditor.
Okay.
Okay, while mentioning about that, does it have to come from someone who is in our field, for instance, the same background, or does it have to become, or does it have to come from someone, for instance, I'm in management, I have to take someone's point of view who is from maybe like from TESOL. to look
I
towards
would
that?
say I think it goes back to what your supervisor feels
I
right to you, because different the thing about the academic world, many people have different schools of thoughts.
yeah.
So like for me, for example, when I did my PhD, I did ask my supervisor. I wanted to do um I wanted to do iterator reliability. I wanted to give it to someone else to read and to have that degree of agree. He did not agree with me because he said that if you're not part of the his argument was, I remember this, his argument was that if he's not part if the reader is not part of the research, he might have a distorted perspective from what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that is also another argument by having this external auditor. It can be someone who can give you that check and balance, but it can also some people say, well, you're not in the research, you don't know what we are looking for. So that's also that part of the argument. So I think with regards to external auditor, I think go back to your supervisor and see what they think is best for your study. If your study is really, really specific, and then you want to have someone who is not from the field, I think it might be problematic to some extent.
I see. Okay, thank you, Doctor.
All right.
Assalamualaikum, Doctor. I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to ask
Who is
about
this?
qualitative analysis.
Idora.
I'm Fazlin. I'm from ED950,
Okay.
Idora. Okay, I would
Okay,
like
yes,
to
Idora.
yeah, I would like to ask a question about the avoiding bias in qualitative analysis. Is it does it I mean is it necessary for us to do quantitative analysis also in order to avoid bias in qualitative analysis? Thank you.
Right. Okay. Yes, if let's say that is one of your, we go back through triangulation. So some people might be tapi before you decide whether you want to do quantitative as way to check the reliability, I think that's the other way around. You need to first decide whether your research can be done in a mixed method, method or quantitative method first. So you can't decide at the end, eh, I think I'm a bit biased, so I want to put in a quantitative. So that's not, I don't think that's you are macam you are taking many steps backwards, I think. So but if you have a mixed method, that would be good because it complements one another. If let's say your research objective is suitable for that particular research design. So I wouldn't do that, Idora. I wouldn't include quantitative just because I want to ensure trustworthiness. It has to be decided earlier if you want to do a mixed method.
Thank you very much.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor.
All right. Okay. My AE students, are you okay? Well, when I say my AE students, I mean all the undergrads. Are you guys okay? Panggil nama lah, sekejap eh. Let me call upon some of the names. Norwani Ramli, are you okay? Any questions?
No, doctor, thank you.
Checking you're still there. Yay. And then we have Adriana. Are you okay, Adriana?
Okay, doctor.
Okay, all right. Okay, so if I assume there are no more questions. I hope at least this is not like supposed to like prepare you for your qualitative data analysis, but I do hope that I've given you some insight on what it takes to take upon a qualitative data research. It's a lot of work, but well, you will feel satisfied with what you have done. So that's what I have to say about qualitative research. Okay, so I wish everyone in your research, in your AE, in your dissertation, in your PhD thesis. I wish you all the best. Keep on going. I know sometimes you feel like There's no end to things. You feel like you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but trust me, there will be a day where you will finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, towards the end of your writing. So just keep going, don't stop. If you stop, that's when it's very difficult for you to pick yourself back up to start writing. That is, I find that very difficult. Once you have stopped, finding the momentum back is difficult. So just keep on going. Every day, at least put in 1 hour just to read or just to do formatting. At least you don't leave it on the side for too long. All right, so I wish you all the best. Dr. Yati, I think I hand it back over to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. So I apologize if I've made any mistakes and I've offended anyone in whatever I said. So Dr. Yati, I hand it back over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome, Dr. Elia. I'm standing in for Dr. Yati.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Elia. I have learned a lot. I am so sorry for asking questions because
No problem.
yeah, I always want to know more about qualitative because I did not do it during my basically study.
Elia
Okay,
is my guru for quantitative research.
next.
Sama-sama
Oh
belajar.
yeah, next week next week kita belajar quantitative.
Yes.
So I guess no more questions for from the students. Yeah. Luckily we will share the video recording. Yeah, with all of you, and I'm sure if you have any like personal questions, yeah, or one consultation from Dr. Elia, you can be contacted, right? Okay. So there is a link for attendance in the chat box. Yeah, please sign up, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much, Dr. Elia, for giving that enlightening talk about how to do qualitative research. I hope we will have you again next semester. Okay, all the best students. Yeah, I hope to see you also next week for the final AE clinic on quantitative research design. Yeah, and yes, we will also upload the slides from Dr. Elia in the Google Classroom or Google folder. Okay, with that, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. See you soon. Bye. Thank you, Dr. Elia.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Bye.
Also, can I ask? I'm from